Hello, hello, hello. Happy Transit Chat Sunday. Thank you for your patience. Sorry, I needed to catch up on my spiritual protections before starting today and realized that I didn't have time. I had therapy right before this as well. So, yeah, it's good to see you guys. Please let me know that you're here by saying a little hello in the chat. I already see some homies have pulled up. Good morning, Dr. Deb on the West Coast. Good afternoon, Desiree. Good afternoon, Lolo. Yeah, spicy week in the sky. And I'll be completely honest, I have not thought about it very much. Oh my gosh. Hi, Sherry. So good to have you back. Welcome. I hope everything is going better now than it was before. I know a lot's been going on. Hey, Krista. Hey, bestie. Hey, Abigail. Welcome, welcome. My headphones are a little buzzy since I dropped one in soup last week. No. I did that before. I accidentally wore mine in the pool once, forgot that I had them in my pocket. Mistakes were made. Happy Mercury retrograde. Speaking of Mercury retrograde though, thank goodness both retrogrades actually end this week. Wow, I did put a note in the description if you read it before you tuned in. So we'll talk about that. But first, hi, hello. My name is Mix Mercury, the Astro Himbo, and you are watching Transit Chat Sunday. Welcome back. For anyone who is confused, I actually don't believe that what do I want to say here? I want to choose my words carefully. I am an astrologer who is inspired by a number of different sources, but I don't actually lay claim to any one source because a lot of our ideas are inspired by other ideas, right? So, especially when it comes to astrology, I'm just talking about whatever I was thinking about that day, with the context of whatever I listened to that day and whatever conversations I had over the week and other things that I've been observing. So, whoever needed to know, uh, I just be talking. So, if you know, you know. So, that is my comment for today. Um, this week, lots happening in the sky. We have, I think today, Venus retrograde will conjoin Saturn in. No, actually, that's tomorrow, isn't it? Let me look. I wrote it down, but I haven't actually looked at it. So, yeah, that is today. I was right. So, earlier this morning, Venus retrograde completed its trine with Mars in Cancer. Tomorrow, April 7th, Venus will conjoin Saturn in the sign of Pisces. So Venus is moving backwards and stationary this week at 0 degrees Pisces, very close to our slow moving friend Saturn in Pisces. Mercury also stations direct tomorrow. So Mercury is also paused in the sky right now as we speak. That can feel a little itchy sometimes. Like for example, me trying to say what I was trying to say and stumbling over my words because I'm still indecisive about if I actually want to talk in depth about what I'm referencing or not. But we'll see. We'll see how I feel by the end of this conversation. My therapist and I couldn't come to a conclusion about that. Oh, lots of people in the chat today. Welcome, welcome. Please like the video. By the way, so more of our friends come and show up and join our conversation. Yeah, and then nothing, just a couple of moon transits until Sunday. No, it's not Sunday. Sorry, Saturday, April the 12th. Saturday, April 12th, we have the full moon at 29 degrees Virgo. And then we have Venus stationary direct. So basically, Mercury and Venus will station direct this week. So we will be out of retrograde season. We are moving out of eclipse season with this last Virgo full moon. And then on Sunday, the sun will enter Aries. And hopefully, if I have time this week, I will do a little Aries ingress reading for at least the US just to see, because I have looked at that chart and it's quite interesting to me. And I think it will say a lot about what is to come for us. So that'll be fun. And if I don't do it on Sunday, I will do it the following Sunday because it's something I really want to talk about. It's just a matter of if I'll have time this week to put all my thoughts together. So let me see what you guys are saying in that chat. Yes, yes, yes. Almost free of Jupiter and Taurus as well. Yes, we do have one more month. One more month of Jupiter and Taurus. And then we can move on to the madness, the most madness mutable stuff. Whatever. Sherry says life was lifing very hard, but things have calmed down a bit. Praise Kier. I'm so glad. Thankful that things are so much better now. And Dr. Deb, I'm also glad that you are feeling better. Lilo says this last degree of full moon in Virgo buildup has been whew, and it has. It's so funny. Like whenever you're in the middle of big planetary shifts, at least as an astrologer, you forget about everything else, or at least I do. But I tried to remember that, yeah, last week we did have Mars move back into Cancer, and I'm sure that's been palpable for most of us. And then, yeah, this week, the stationary directs, the full moon, and then Sun entering Aries soon. But I'm very glad to not have to talk about fixed signs as much because they're not dominant in the sky anymore. Talking about fixed signs, my chart is fixed sign dominant. Sometimes I'm just like, can we talk about something else? So I'm excited about that. Almost everything I see online is tropical and it makes my brain hurt. And you know what? Even then, I have come around, even though I'm not going to use the tropical zodiac probably ever again because it just doesn't land for me. Even I have noticed, at least when doing birth chart readings, I can see how you can still find overlapping topics between sidereal and tropical. Do I find that in my practice, for whatever reason, me using sidereal just works better with my brain and seems to be a little bit more obvious during the timing of certain things? Yeah. But is there overlap between both? Honestly, yes. If I were to do everything exactly the same, but use the tropical zodiac instead of the sidereal zodiac, I could probably still find a way to make it resonate because part of being an astrologer is making interpretations and deriving meaning from the observations that you're making in your daily life, along with the actual long held traditions and archetypes and practices that come with astrology that have been around for centuries, right? So you can find a way to make it work. Me personally, though, I'm going to stick with sidereal because it just, timing wise, just works a little bit better for me. As a mercurial person, why? I feel you regarding that topic. Hey, Liv. Desiree, I'm sensing some tea. There is, but I genuinely don't want to be messy, but I want to talk about it. So I'm like trying to figure out what the line is of doing that in a way that's actually like honest and professional and that would actually make a difference for either of us. But if it doesn't really make a difference for either of us, then it's kind of like, okay, most of us saw what happened, we're just going to ignore it. That's kind of how I feel right now, even though I've already talked about it because I can't help myself. But we'll see. If it comes up in today's conversation, I will just trust my intuition and go with it. But right now, my guides, my therapist, my own mind is telling me maybe not yet. So, hey, heart. Happy Sunday. Yes, yes. I need less retrograde energy, though. I appreciate it. Girl, me too. Hi, sending well wishes to everyone. Hello, April. Cool. So what did I actually want to talk about today? I'm going to leave this up in case anybody has any questions. Feel free to ask them. Drop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer. I don't have a strict lesson plan today, but I did just want to talk more about mutable energy. Hold on, I want to read this first. Unfortunately, most tropical astrologers who have large followings online aren't actually practicing tropical astrology. It's mostly pop culture astrology and making things up. That part. Because astrology is not just personality assessments. Like I've mentioned to people at work, that I'm an astrologer on the side and the ways that I use it, like for politics, for example. And one of the replies I got was like, you use astrology to figure out like people's politics? And I was like, no, 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 no. Like based on their personality, figuring out people's politics. I was like, no, 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 no. I use it to like describe what's going on and make predictions and stuff like that. Like it's a different thing, you know. People don't know that you can actually do astrology in a serious way because of pop astro. And so if anything, that's the thing that I try to not emulate, but you know, people will also interpret it that way because that's the only way that they understand astro as well. So anyway, setting that down for now. Something I wanted to talk about, hey Hillary, was something I wanted to talk about today was you know, we're in the thick of a bunch of water signs right now. Ever since Mars left Gemini to move into Cancer, we've had 4 planets in Pisces and then a planet in Cancer. That's 5 planets in water signs. And water signs, as evidenced by the topic today, are about feelings. Big feelings. Lots of feelings and emotions and body and needs and a sense of urgency around all of that. And so something that I felt would be relevant to 2025, which is a water dominant year as far as transits go and significant transits go, is like, what are we really talking about whenever we talk about feelings in the body in astro? And then especially whenever it comes to these mutable topics, like how does all of this fit together? Specifically mutable and cardinal topics, because that's mostly what we're dealing with this year versus kind of moving away from fixed signs that we were dealing with last year. So first thing that you want to understand about mutable signs that to me is different than the other modalities is that mutable signs are ruled by 2 planets mostly, if you're using traditional planets, and that's Mercury and Jupiter. So all 4 mutable signs come back to 2 planets that are constantly relying on each other to come to some kind of truth about yourself, about the world, about a situation that you're having, whatever it is. Jupiter, like we've said, is going to represent the larger, broader context and meaning and politics and belief systems and any other way that you can think of that would structure and color and contextualize your beliefs and biases. That's Jupiter. Jupiter is like, I think about it as your subconscious mind because it's partially things that you've been told throughout your life or experiences that you've had throughout your life that you've kind of like integrated into your sense of self, and that you've also what's the word, that have influenced your perception of the world. So that's basically how I would describe Jupiter. It's the schema or the framework that you have in your own mind that helps you make sense of things. And it's informed by, like I said, different belief systems, experiences, memories, all those different things. So that's one side of meaning making, represented by 2 signs, Sagittarius and Pisces. Sagittarius is the fire way of doing all of those things, and Pisces is the water way of doing all those things, which I've talked about on previous lives. Mercury, on the other hand, is more of a receiver of information. I mean, they both receive information, but Mercury is more like the one who is learning and speaking, and it's the information itself, whether that's information coming in or going out. And it's information without larger meaning attached to it, right? It's like kind of taking information at face value. It is information without context. It's information without really any kind of agenda. It's just information for the sake of information. So if Mercury is the information, that's going to be the Gemini and the Virgo of it all. And then Jupiter is what the information actually means, how you interpret the information. Then both of those together, like I said, help you form beliefs and ideas, and they also influence how you interpret things. So a lot of this mutable stuff, whenever we're talking about these 4 signs, is really like, how are you drawing conclusions based on the information that you're taking in? And what are all of the things that are informing the conclusions that you come to about said information? That's like mutable stuff in a nutshell. So whenever we talk about Pisces specifically, Pisces is the ways that um our body informs the conclusions that we make, right? It is um in all of the ways that body and somatics and nervous system stuff, like how all of the ways that those can influence how you interpret information and how you share information and communicate information as well. The share and communicate information part is important because, like I said, Mercury stations direct tomorrow in the sign of Pisces. So this is Mercury trying to do Jupiter things. And when Mercury tries to do Jupiter things, we usually end up with a lot of jumping to conclusions. And when Mercury is in water signs, specifically Pisces in this case, this is jumping to conclusions mostly based on how you're emotionally responding to information more than the objective aspect of the information itself. So, how information makes you feel. Now, I know this sounds like however it sounds to you. Maybe this makes sense, maybe it doesn't. But if you study things like somatic awareness, right? Like somatic psychology, or neurobiology and the ways that your nervous system, which is closely related to your psychology, right? The ways that your nervous system can influence your mental state at any given moment, then it kind of makes sense that, yeah, if I am reading the news and they start talking about Donald Trump and my heart rate goes up immediately at the mention of his name, that's going to create a bias around how I receive that information. Or if you're talking to someone who has different political beliefs than you at all, the minute that they open their mouth and they say something that you know people ideologically opposed to you usually say, that's going to trigger your nervous system. And in the moment that it triggers your nervous system, that's going to make you feel like, okay, hold on a second. It might trigger your fight or flight. It might make you feel defensive. It might make you feel like you want to fight. It might make you emotional, like upset. It might make you want to cry. It'll make you feel all types of things that are then going to influence the spin that you put on that information, um, subconsciously or unconsciously, right? Like your own brain is going to interpret that information a certain way. And therefore, you'll respond to that information a certain way and then draw even more conclusions based on that tiny bit of information that you may not necessarily, with Jupiter signs being involved, you may not necessarily feel the need or desire to explore and inquire further, right? Whenever we're in fight or flight in general, whenever your nervous system is activated, your sympathetic nervous system is activated, your brain has a way of like shutting off a lot of extra noise and extra processing that it would usually do. It's going to stop taking in a lot of accessory information and it's going to boil down to a few things. One being, am I safe? One thing, am I safe? Two, is this other person safe? Like, are they a threat to me? And also, is the other person safe? And then three, I don't know what the third thing is. I'm kind of just going off the top of my head. There might be a third thing of like, what do I need to do right now in order to get to safety, right? But the main question that your mind is always going to ask is, am I safe? Once your nervous system gets triggered. And it's very, 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 very hard to convince yourself that you're safe cognitively when your body is like, I don't really know. So it's hard to be curious when you're in when you're questioning safety, basically. It is hard to wonder and to create and to imagine in like open-minded ways when you feel like you're being threatened or when you feel like you're in threat. Even if it doesn't rationally make sense for you to feel threatened, if some part of your subconscious mind is like, this is dangerous, you're going to respond to this situation like it's dangerous. So I hope that that helps. This is applicable to, I think, Pisces in general, because it is ultimately protective. The way that memory and intuition can help you receive information in a certain way that you can, figure out what the next move is that you need to do. But interpreting situations is crucial to survival, right? So this is not something that we want to demonize. It's not something that we want to turn off. It's not something that we want to be overly suspicious of, but it is something to just kind of notice when you can, whether that's as it's happening or in hindsight, because it influences a lot of how we receive information. So anyways, I'm going to pause there. I want to see what you guys are saying. My neuropsychologist in the room says all of those great mindfulness exercises go right out the window in fight or flight. Like I can't see those fake Trump hats with clever alternate sayings because from a distance they trigger my fight or flight. That's an excellent example. And y'all pardon my thing today. It keeps going out of focus, but this is an excellent example. I'm sure y'all know what the Make America Great Again red hats look like. The fact that they're red was obviously very intentional and very strategic marketing by the Orange Man. But people have tried to make similar hats that say things that aren't fascistic in nature. But at the end of the day, what you're going to see is a red hat with white writing, and that's automatically going to make you want to fight somebody if you are not pro-Trump, right? So that's an excellent example because your body is like, no, I don't like that shit. Same thing with the whole Americana conversation, like we talked about last week. Sometimes people see an American flag, and to them, it might as well be a swastika. Like, yeah, it doesn't really matter what else you were intending to do with that flag. My body remembers. Okay, the South remembers. All right. So yeah, that's a great example. All the mindfulness stuff, it goes out the window. And that's actually exactly what I wanted to talk about today, with Mars now being in Cancer instead of Mars being in Gemini, where Gemini, like I said, would be a little bit more inquisitive, maybe a little bit more curious, or a little bit more open to receiving new information. um we're not in that energy anymore, and the Gemini energy, it does resist the Piscean impulse to jump to conclusions based off of small amounts of information. It does resist that. It says, yes, this is one meaning we could derive from this incident, but there are also multiple other meanings and perspectives that we could apply. So that's a little bit about the Mars, the Gemini Pisces square. And that will be relevant again whenever Jupiter moves into Gemini. But for now, until Jupiter gets to Gemini, now we just have water signs vibing and building off of each other. Let me see what else y'all said. My friends keep sending me stuff from them, and I'm like, no thanks, it doesn't really resonate. Yeah. My chart is mostly mutable and I am going through it. I've definitely been having big feelings and it's been good, actually. This isn't my natural inclination, so it's been a welcome change. I am with you on that. Way more responsive, it's a key word for today, to my body and emotions than what I would normally be as an air dominant person. April says, I can identify Age of Aquarius as like a pop culture astrology mainstream tropical chatter, but like what also falls under the pop culture astro umbrella. Would studying celebrity charts count? I think so. I think pop culture astro is like is like reading sun sign horoscopes in the newspaper, right? Like it can be mostly innocuous, but it's also like very, very vague and generalized. Cafe astrology would be another thing I would consider personally to be pop culture. And honestly, any kind of like AI generated or like, I don't know, just generic um astro interpretation horoscope thing that people post every month, like astrology is more than just your sun sign. So usually if people are just doing sun sign astrology, that's probably pop culture astro, right? Or when people are like making sweeping generalizations about the personalities of all people who fall under one sign, without any nuance, and what they sound like they're talking about is just a personal beef that they have with somebody with that sun sign. Like that's also kind of pop culture vibes to me. um but studying celebrity charts, I think you can do that if you want to. Sometimes I do it because I think it provides additional context to whatever that celebrity is experiencing at a given moment. Um, if I'm using charts, usually what I'm doing is trying to figure out how they're being impacted by the current astro. Like it's not so much me like reading a celebrity's chart and then making a bunch of assumptions about their personhood and personality. You can do a little bit of that, of course, but to me, I'm like, oh, this person is probably like, of course, like we talked about with Chapel Roan last week having a Scorpio moon, right? Like if I kind of know the life experience of Scorpio signs, and she has a Scorpio moon and is experiencing a moment where she's being like villainized and alienated by culture and society for asserting her boundaries, then I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, makes sense because XYZ configuration is happening right now and her moon is getting beat up, shit like that. So to me, that's being a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more technical about the way that you use astro. But sometimes people will just be like, oh, well, she's just a bitch because she's a Scorpio moon. Like, that's pop culture astro, in my opinion. But I think it probably means something different to different people. Krista says, the way I've been spending all of my energy to be grounded and stay neutral this last month, not to jump to conclusions. Honestly, same. And as someone with Jupiter in a water sign, like, yeah, it's difficult. We read this one earlier. Seems the key is to be grounded this week and not reactive, I'm seeing. We're going to talk about this today, actually. Because yes, and, right? I'm going through prolonged exposure therapy, and the way this makes so much sense. Another excellent example, exposure therapy. Oh my gosh, yeah. So exposure therapy, usually used for people who have some kind of like phobias or like traumatic experience that they are trying to find ways to feel safer in everyday life, and in some ways just find better like coping strategies, or to even become desensitized to the thing that's super triggering, right? So the thing about exposure therapy, like for example, if someone is afraid of dogs, just afraid of all dogs because one time when they were little they got bit by, like, I don't know, they got bit by an aggressive dog. Exposure therapy would gradually over time and in various different ways and various levels of intensity gently expose you to a dog that is actually safe and that is actually, trained and well behaved and very friendly, so that, maybe one week you stand in the room with the dog on the other side of the room and then you manage. And then the next week, maybe you take a few steps closer. And then the next week, maybe the dog sniffs you and you just stand there. Or maybe you stick your hand out, something like that is just kind of a generalization of what exposure therapy can be like, so that over time your nervous system is learning safer experiences, because in some ways it takes, at least, this is kind of a rough estimate, right? This, y'all can correct me if this is not exactly accurate, but for every one positive experience, there's like, or excuse me, for every one negative experience, you need like 5 positive experiences to even have those on like equal footing, if even that much, right? It takes a lot more positive experiences to integrate than it does a negative experience. A negative experience is going to stay with you forever, even if you feel less activated around it. Because again, survival. It benefits us as a species to have sort of a negative bias, they call it, towards things, because avoidance usually is going to save your life more than naivety, right? So that's another great example. Yeah. And on that same note, I saw another reply. Exposure therapy is amazing, but autistic people have to be careful with it because of sensory issues. 1000%. 1000%. Okay, what else? When I was a baby, my gym teacher in 2017, 2018. Oh, when I was a baby gym teacher, this nanny would come up there in a pink MAGA hat every time, and it really upset me and my coworkers. Yes. Before I discovered Sidereal, I was constantly told I was a typical Pisces, and like, what was that? And what does that mean? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, moving on. So whenever we're talking about reactivity, and like emotional reactivity, this is something that I find comes up a lot with my Cancer clients, which, like I said, Mars is in Cancer now. I've noticed, particularly Cancer Sun clients, and I'm saying this as someone with the Sun in the opposing position in Capricorn, right? So we'll talk about both of these as my example. I've noticed a lot of Sun and Cancer people will say, like, I don't want to be perceived sunward as someone who is super like emotionally volatile and reactive, even though I do have big feelings, like I am a feeler. A lot of water people tend to be labeled as like sensitive, which is fantastic, right? So I've noticed there's kind of this feeling of like, man, I don't want people to like make judgments about me based on the way that I express my emotions, kind of. Whereas for me on the Capricorn side, I'm like known for being calm, cool, and collected on the outside because I'm really good at repressing my emotional expression and maybe kind of concealing or even being in denial about how I really feel about something. So to others, it looks like I'm just like cool as a cucumber. When in reality, on the inside, I am either detached from my emotions or I'm like really struggling to figure out how to actually let them be seen because I also don't want to be perceived as someone who is emotionally reactive and out of control, right? So, same thing, different avenues to get there, right? But what I'm realizing, and something that I also need to be better about when I'm talking about these things, is that the point of, say, bringing it back to communication, because that's really what we're talking about today. Actually, let me read what I wrote on not what I wrote, but what I reposted on Instagram because that's what made me think about this conversation today. Somebody made a post where it's a therapy account and they made this post and I guess somebody in the comment section said something about like just be calm, delivery is everything, your partner isn't your therapist. Is like basically what someone commented on this therapist's account. And I think this is also something that I've probably said to some extent in terms of like, the way that you communicate makes a big difference in conflict, right? And that like blowing up on somebody may not necessarily yield the best results. Like it's better to, take a beat, go collect yourself and then come back and like have the conversation in a more collected way. But you can tell right there that that's already me speaking from a Capricorn bias of like, yeah, probably like settle down. You don't need to let other people see all of that extra stuff because, you know, it's going to maybe escalate the conversation further. But that's also not always true. And this post was a good reminder for me to be like, I need to make sure that I'm a little bit more clear whenever I talk about this. So basically, this post goes on to say that there's a fallacy in this idea and that respectability, the fallacy being that respectability equals validity. And that there's an implication here that unless your emotional expression is presented calmly, that it's invalid or dismissible. And that actually ends up being emotional perfectionism that penalizes people for having nervous systems. And I was like, you know what? You fucking right. Yes, exactly. The minute someone tells me to calm down, I turn into a murder bot. Right, exactly. So it's like, so this therapist goes on to say that in emotionally intimate relationships, delivery does matter, yes, but it's not everything. Somatic truth doesn't always show up neatly and calmly. Sometimes it shows up shaking, crying, or snapping. And it's important that we don't always interpret these as attacks, but as urgent signals trying to be seen, metabolized, and expressed. And so the truth is, delivery is part of relational safety, but so is the ability to hold dysregulated truth without needing it to be perfectly packaged and delivered first. And that is what I wanted to talk about today. And I had to just read it directly from her because that was an excellent way to put it as far as like what we're kind of dealing with this week at the very least, and probably during some of these Aries transits as well, because let's be honest, Aries can also um pop off. So yes, as your resident Capricorn, this is also something I have to challenge myself to do, and let me tell you why. So I also listened to a Jillian on Love podcast episode this morning, and I listened to a sex therapist podcast episode this morning too that helped me kind of think about this in some other ways. So I'll start with I'll start with going elaborating on that point and then I'll give examples. So um you can communicate a lot you can communicate a lot of things without words, right? Um if you are in a conversation with somebody and they say something to you and you go, "Ugh," right? Like you just hearing me go, "Ugh," without even knowing what the other person said already tells you a lot about the fact that they probably said something to me that made me feel annoyed, that made me feel frustrated, exasperated. Like you can make a lot of inferences based off of just, with the body language and the sigh and the tone and the eye roll. Like that already communicates a lot of information to you. Sorry, focus. Um, so when you're in conversation with someone who is trying to share something with you, but what they're sharing in terms of the information, the words that they're speaking, if what they're sharing with their words and what they're speaking doesn't match how they actually emotionally feel about the thing that they're sharing, then there's going to be some confusion for you about, like, okay, how serious is this? Are they sure? Like, it's going to create a lot of confusion and maybe like hesitancy for you about just like, okay, I'm not really sure what's going on. So if I were having a conversation with you and I said, just look like calm, cool composure, like, yeah, so someone was in the building this morning and they got shot and somebody died in the ambulance and came and picked them up and took them out, and it was like a really big disaster. There was blood all over the floor. There were a lot of people who got really worked up. The sound of the gunshot, like I saw a bunch of people duck. It was really crazy, but it was really wild, but fortunately everybody's okay and it's not that big of a deal. You'd be looking at me like, "What happened? Somebody got shot? There was blood everywhere. People like whatever, all of that, right?" Like you would be like, "Are you okay? You're just calm about the fact that this massive event happened minutes before I walked in." And then again, the other person's going to be like, "Wait, am I safe? Are you safe? Is everybody okay? Like what's going on?" It's not going to match up. The information doesn't match with my like composure, my calm, cool collectedness of sharing this massive event with you, right? There's a disconnect there. Same thing if you are talking to a friend and your friend is like, you're like asking your friend like, "Hey, what's going on? You seem kind of down today." And your friend is like, "Yeah, I just really didn't like the way that you talked about my outfit." It just like it really didn't make me feel very good. I felt so like judged, and I felt really judged, and it kind of hurt my feelings. I don't know how it made me feel like I'm just like some stupid idiot. Like, and the other person's looking at you like, "Okay, you're laughing, but you're telling me that this like hurt your feelings." So I'm kind of confused about what the truth is here. Like, are you actually upset with me or is it not that big of a deal? Right? So these are just being examples of whenever your tone, your body language, and whatever doesn't match the information that you're trying to communicate with somebody. So from that angle, right? Like it makes sense if you're trying to have a serious conversation with somebody about how they've impacted you or the ways that you're being affected by something that you're experiencing, it would kind of make sense for your emotions to match the subject matter, right? Um, and when they don't match, how is the other person supposed to fully understand like the gravity and the context of what it is that you're saying? This is something that they told us in coaching school to point out in sessions with people when they're trying to be emotionally honest with you verbally, but the emotions don't actually match. Because then you put that in a relationship and it's like, okay, well, you're trying to tell your partner that they've really impacted you in this way, but then you're talking about it in a way that doesn't you're not showing that you're actually emotionally impacted. So how are they supposed to believe you? How are they supposed to take you seriously? How are they supposed to know that like this is a big deal to you if you're not being emotionally vulnerable and expressive in some kind of a way? Doesn't mean that you have to, like I said, scream and cry and make a big scene, but like if you're always repressing your tears, how are people going to know that you were really as hurt as you say that you are? I'm definitely guilty of this. Like I'm a Gemini moon in the first house, Capricorn Mercury ruling my Gemini moon with a fucking Capricorn sun ruled by Mars and Leo. Like everything about me doesn't really want y'all to know how I feel because I got Scorpio placements. I've been, you know, misunderstood or demonized for my feelings. So why would I ever want to express them again? Right. And maybe you can relate to that. I was just about to say, Deb, yes, especially like for neurodivergent people, autistic people as well. Um, how many times I've heard this a lot from autistic friends and clients where they always get interpreted as like being cold or being distant or whatever it is. Um, like you can't perceive emotions or whatever when usually a lot of times they're just being direct, being honest, or whatever it may be, but there may not be um a whole lot of expressiveness outwardly to match. It may be going on internally though, right? So yeah, all of this. Yes, exactly, Tree Talk. So this explains why my therapist lights up whenever I told her I was autistic. I guess my face was blank and my voice was flat. Yes. Yes. Madison, why express my feelings when I could write cryptic poetry instead? Also that. Sherry says, my Libra ass is getting dragged. LOL. I really can't match my outward expression to what I'm actually feeling. Winter, get out of my life. Jupiter and Taurus has gotten reworked with that because everything is not funny or calm. You know what? And Taurus people be the worst about trying to say how they feel about something and turning it into a joke. Like the most traumatic thing in their life could have just happened and they go make a joke about it. And you're like, girl, are you sure? Like, so of course, all of this is relevant because we're coming up on a Virgo full moon. And Virgo, no shade to Virgos, but Virgo often will be people just like Taurus, just like Capricorns, earth signs, right? Who are more concerned, or rather who prioritize being pragmatic, being logical, being rational, practical, composed. And what's another good word for earth signs? Y'all don't need another word. I need to stop doing that. Y'all know what I meant the first time. But yeah, there's just a lot of emotional withholding that goes on with earth signs. So coming up on a Virgo full moon, which is a Mercury ruled sign, that would usually like to say, yes, because this event happened, then I reacted this way. Doesn't it make sense that I would react this way to this information? It's like, okay, girl, like, be so fucking real. Like, just tell us what's going on. How do you really feel? Like, yes, I know the sequence of events that happened that led to us getting into this situation and that you reacted to me because I did this thing to you and it's very transactional. Cool. Got it. But how do you really feel? And so, yes, Virgo's dragging you guys a little bit, myself as well, because I've also done that. But collectively, what does it mean to come up on a Virgo full moon while Mercury, the ruler of the full moon, is in Pisces, the opposing sign, who, as Madison just so hilariously put, would rather write cryptic poetry instead. So that you're maybe reading a very condensed version of poetry or song lyrics or whatever it is that don't exactly say what you mean to say. Don't explicitly say what you mean to say, but allude to the fact that something is happening. As a matter of fact, to call myself out, the way that I opened today's live with that very cryptic intro of events that have recently happened and not actually expanding on them, that was very Mercury and Pisces of me. And I shouldn't have done that to y'all, but I changed my mind as soon as I opened my mouth. So had to dig myself out of that hole. But these are the things, right? So when we talk about communication, emotions are a big part of communicating because you can say a lot without words. And when it comes to Cancer and Mars and Cancer specifically, I do think the impulse rather around this transit is that we feel this need to want to like on the one hand, it can feel like a very emotionally reactive transit or placement, no shade. But it can feel like a very emotionally reactive placement. And it can also be a very emotionally responsive placement. And I think what a lot of us are aiming to do is to be responsive more so than reactive. But why? And the way that the communication expert in that Julian on Love episode put it this morning, if I can remember correctly, is that the main issue we have with communication is not whether we're being too emotional or not, but it's the fact that a lot of times we don't even know exactly what it is that we need from a conversation or that we need from the other person, and how to actually express that. And I would also add that a lot of times we don't fully know how we feel either. So we get into conflict or conversation or whatever it is. We do a lot of talking around the point until finally we get to the place of like, I feel hurt because XYZ thing happened. And when we talk about Pisces, a lot of times what we'll do is we will almost impose meaning into a situation on behalf of the other person rather than actually ask the other person what they meant, what their perspective is, what's going on for them. So, for example, starting out sentences with other people that say, I just feel like you, da 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 da. Like, I just feel like you don't love me and you don't take me seriously. And blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, the feeling is real and honest because the crying and the faster speech and the just like all of that is real and valid. But when you're saying basically in this example what you think the other person is thinking about you, those aren't your feelings, right? So again, another mismatch between what you're displaying emotionally and what you're actually communicating. There's a difference between showing up to a conversation and sobbing and saying, I feel incredibly hurt and like my words are being dismissed, or I feel dismissed every time that I speak because every time I start to talk about how I feel, you interrupt me, right? Like there's that. You can be saying that, tears in your eyes, raising your voice, whatever. That's a whole different thing than this other kind of like, you don't respect me and you don't love me and you just don't want to hear anything I have to say. Blah, blah. Like, those are two different things. I feel really hurt when you talk to me like this. Is a different thing than why do you hate me? You know what I mean? Like, that's the best example I can think of right now. Sorry, guys. I mean, like, pull on some examples, but yeah. So that's one part of this conversation, right? Um, and then on the other side of it, right, like from the more earth composed side, there's a difference between well, I just feel like if you really loved me, you wouldn't talk to me like that. I don't know if that's really more earth or fire signs, but what I'm getting at is that there's a conclusion being drawn based on information that's coming in. Like, well, if you really loved me, you wouldn't talk to me like that. So every time that you talk to me like that, it must mean that you think I'm a piece of shit. Like, I don't know. Right. So um part of the whole purpose behind this conversation around regulating yourself before you get into conflict, like before you get into intimate conflict, is not so that you can show up like composed and controlled and controlling your emotions and repressing your emotions, right? It's so that you can get clarity from the front part of your brain what it is that you're actually upset about and that you can communicate that to the other person. It's not about getting rid of your emotions and that your emotions aren't allowed to be present. It's not even about like not snapping at somebody because for the most part a lot of these things can be repaired afterwards, right? But the point is meaning. Is the meaning that you want the other person to get from what you're saying actually coming across? Or is it opening the door to a whole lot of other assumptions that don't actually match your original concern? And then in that whole going back to Mars and Cancer thing about like, things like being impulsive or things like having a sense of urgency and really wanting to relieve your discomfort by like, let's hurry up and have the conversation now and just put it all out there. Like sometimes rushing in to a resolution before all parties have had a chance to even understand what the conflict is that they're having can just lead to this cycle where the conflict never really gets resolved, you know? So the whole purpose of slowing down is really just to buy both people time to Get back into the front part of your brain instead of the survival parts of your brain where you can make sense of things and also be open to others' perspectives. That way, your argument is not a competition about who's right and who's correct, and that your argument is instead trying to come to some kind of shared reality and conclusion between the both of you, right? Because intimate conflict is not about being right or wrong, and it's not about, no, this is exactly what happened and the way that you're saying it happened is a lie. Like, it's not about that either, right? It's about, I'm having an experience over here and you're having an experience over there. We're having different experiences. How can we both help to understand each other's experience while holding our own emotional reality at the same time? That's what I think is a big challenge with Saturn in Pisces, and what I think can potentially be a benefit of Saturn in Pisces, in the way that Saturn can impose structure in places, structure and limits and boundaries in places that maybe otherwise would just blow things out of proportion. I haven't fully sorted out that aspect of it yet. Because this idea of Saturn imposing structure in your Pisces house is something I got from a different Twitter account. I think her name is I cannot remember her name, but that came from somebody else, basically. But I'm writing a long Patreon post talking a little bit more about like what I think Saturn in Pisces is and what this means for Saturn in Pisces return people. Especially once like Jupiter gets into Cancer, and this is like a whole thing where now Saturn is in mutual reception with Jupiter in Cancer around emotional regulation and expression and responsiveness along with meaning making. Okay, I'm gonna pause and read the chat because I lost my train of thought. All right. Literally, I sent a voice note to a friend and was laughing, but afterwards I was like, bruh, none of that was funny. It was indeed traumatic, right? Why is my whole chart being dragged winter? I'm leaving this live. No, come back. Well, there must be a reason you guys needed to hear this today. I don't know. Like I said, I'm in it. Wow, I feel like you're really tracking my chart. Is this why y'all have been coming to get readings from me, Cancer Risings? Because y'all been in it the last month in my chair, and I'm like, what is this about? Mars was in y'all's 12th house, and y'all were like, excuse me, huh? What do you mean I need to use my words? I grew up with a mom who always expressed feelings like an insult. I feel like you are very disrespectful. Right? Like, I feel like you are very disrespectful versus I feel disrespected. Two very different statements. Because one of those is you actually owning your reality of saying, I feel disrespected. Versus the other thing, which is a projection. I feel like you are very disrespectful, because that's saying you're interpreting their behavior in a way that may not be congruent with their actual behavior. What is it when you hate the feeling of other people being visibly affected by your emotional honesty? I deal with that so bad, and I don't know what this is. This is something I'm actively trying to work out in therapy, because same. Like, part of the reason, I know other Capricorn people tend to feel this way, and maybe this is a Saturn thing, actually, because I know you have Saturn in Aquarius too. I'm gonna come back to this, because this is a really good question, and we should flesh it out together. Sherry says, with me and the way my chart is set up, by the time I actually say something, it's been put through so many filters and there's been so much editing. Same. And also a lot of time has passed. It's been at least 3 to 5 business days since the event, and now I finally know how I feel and what to say about it. And now it's like, should I bring this back up? And the truth is, shit doesn't have an expiration date on it, but other people will be frustrated that you're bringing up old shit. And sometimes it just be like that. I've really had to work on I feel like you, because it does not get down to the root of the feeling and places the responsibility on the other person entirely. big asterisks on entirely because yes, when I talk about personal responsibility as I learned it in my coaching course, personal responsibility is not assuming all of the blame and responsibility and fault for something, but it is taking accountability for your part and what you are responsible for in that dynamic, which again goes back to the whole it's not about being right or wrong or correct or incorrect, but it is about I'm having this experience and I'm trying to convey to you that this is the experience that I'm having. What did it feel like for you? And how do we come to a place of understanding both of our perspectives? Because ultimately, when we're talking about truth, in a lot of cases, especially emotionally, there is no objective truth. There's just how you're feeling and the meaning you're making about those feelings and what the other person also makes that mean for them. Stop channeling my mother. You said you had Mars conjunct the moon in Cancer, right? Well, yeah. Wait, don't clock me for rushing for a resolution due to my discomfort. It's me too. If you find yourself being a little bit more anxious around resolution, yeah, it's less about the resolution that you're seeking and more about you needing to actually give yourself a chance to process what you're experiencing too. I think there's something about fight or flight when someone asks how you're feeling, like a deer in the headlights frozen, and taking time is so helpful. Absolutely. Because it's very easy to just be like, I'm fine. This is fine. Well, are you really fine? No. You might be great. You might be fantastic. You might be having a wonderful day. And you also might feel like shit in the world. The asteroid couldn't come soon enough. But, like sometimes we just by habit will not really expand. And, it'd be like that. It's very vulnerable if someone like notice if a little exercise to take with you. Next time someone's like, "Hey, how are you?" and you feel the impulse to say that you're fine, of course, context dependent. You could just imagine for yourself what it would be like to actually say how you felt in that moment and then what would happen from there. Don't do this with random strangers, obviously, but with a friend, if a friend is like, "Hey, how are you doing?" and the impulse is to say that you're fine when you're not, you know what? Actually, I have a lot of feelings right now that I'm not sure about. DBT statements can be really helpful for learning I statements and produce conflict resolution. Absolutely. Solutions now. Solutions yesterday. I don't want to fight anymore. Real. Today's convo is making me feel like I'm not as mature, emotionally mature as I thought. I have more to say about this too, actually. Yeah, the delayed emotional processing is a struggle. Some things take me literal months to fully understand how and why I feel a certain way about something. Same here, like quite literally at least a year before I'm like, oh, that's why that upset me last year. Now I see. I think hating people being visibly upset by your emotional honesty is a Saturnian thing, maybe Libra too. Well, Saturn's exalted in Libra as well, so I think you're right. I do think it's a Saturn thing. Yeah, we will come back to that. Imani Barbarin said something about conversations being cumulative, and that's really helped me as someone who takes a lot of time to process in that Gemini moon filtering. I totally agree with that, honestly. And I interpret communication that way as well because this might even be related to Virgo things as well because I think there's something about well, not even just Virgo, but maybe Mercury in general, but I think there's something about like Mercury signs and wanting to take things at face value that because we had this discussion on this day about this thing, that was all that we needed to say about it. So probably more of a Virgo thing in the earth sign sense. Um, well, we had this conversation a week ago and this isn't how you felt then. So why are you bringing this up now? It's like, well, I've had more thoughts and feelings since then. So building on that last conversation, that actually made me realize that I have a lot more going on than just what we spoke about last week. Right. So I think there's something to say about that as well. And to just assume that a lot of, well, don't assume anything, actually. I take that back. But linking conversations together, like piecing things together, is very Jupiter, right? So sometimes it's not just the one conversation that's going to solve everything. Sometimes it's like therapy is a great example of this. A conversation you had with your therapist 2 years ago, that little bit of information will connect to something that happens 3 years later. And then your therapist is like, oh, these things are related. I see. Also very important Jupiter skill for mercurial peoples to understand. That conversation about accountability beat my ass as an autistic person for the longest time. Sometimes I need 7 years to process. Please understand. Norwegians say upright and not crying in response to how are you? That's funny. I need to use that when the impulse is to say fine. I'm doing terrible, but I'm afraid of people feeling burdened with needing to care for me, so I say I'm okay. Look at that, Jim. You just answered your own question. So that actually makes me think, you know what? Okay, we just discovered something together. So let's go back to this question. I love when this happens. What is it when you hate the feeling of other people being visibly affected by your emotional honesty? So, yes, at Saturn signs, but I actually think this is an earth sign struggle. And the reason why we're so logical and practical and pragmatic, because if we're logical and practical and pragmatic, then there are solutions to our problems. They can be fixed and then we can move on. But feelings on the water sign, remember, water and earth are complementary and opposing elements. Water is like, sometimes I feel this way and sometimes I don't. And there may not necessarily be a reason in the present, a problem that can be solved for why I feel this way. Sometimes I just feel this way. Um, and you're just gonna have to deal with that. Right? But to answer this question, it's this: the fear of burdening people with with needing them to care for you. I do think earth signs in general, Taurus, Capricorn, and Virgo, all struggle with burdening other people with their feelings, burdening other people with being cared for, needing to be cared for, because the whole earth sign experience is that for whatever reason that care was withheld from you, right? Going back to like the whole wounds and gifts thing, um the whole issue, especially for Capricorns, right? But I mean for all of them, there's some experience of withholding emotional safety and security or whatever else that's like, yeah, I'm just going to keep my feelings to myself because the world will not be changed by my feelings, right? And if the world is changed by my feelings, now I'm the problem because I need to be fixed. And if the meaning that you give to this, to sharing your feelings with somebody else, if the meaning that you give to that is that now you're burdening somebody else with having to care for you, where does that come from for you? Right? I was gonna say something else too. I got caught up in the drag. um Boom. Okay, perfect example. Thank you, Madison. Not to be a Virgo, but every time I needed to go to the doctor as a kid, it upset my mother so much because of the cost. I stopped telling her when I was sick. Exactly, right? A recent revelation for me as a Capricorn was, for Capricorn, you deny your own feelings because other people don't have the capacity to hold them for whatever reason. They're busy, they're at work, they got to go make money. To be able to feed you and clothe you and everything else. And so you get this feeling that my feelings there's no room for my feelings here because there are other things that are more important. And there also just may not be a solution for your feeling. And if the logic that you're creating around this thing is that if I express how I feel, then I become a problem that needs to be fixed, then that must mean I'm broken. That must mean there's something wrong with me. That must mean I'm now an inconvenience to other people and people don't like to be inconvenienced. Like insert whatever meaning, whatever judgment, whatever, I don't know, whatever it is that it makes you feel. I feel guilty. I feel, I don't know, like I'm not worthy of being cared for because something supersedes my need to be cared for. Yeah, that would absolutely make you not want to burden other people with your feelings, even when other people are genuinely wanting to help hold that for you, right? I saw another one I need to point out. Okay, so we all had the same mom. So, think about our culture and the world that we live in the West. What happens to mothers when they have babies? Let's say you have a really nice job and now you're pregnant and you need to take maternity leave. But, you know, does your job offer maternity leave in the first place? And if your job does offer maternity leave, is there a threat? Because didn't this just come up with like the Breakfast Club? With that one bitch, what's her name? Just hilarious, terrible, terrible lady. But she, I think, took maternity leave or something like that and came back to her job. And the girl who was like filling in for her while she was gone, I think her name is Lauren, is now like working full time on that podcast with Jess Hilarious, and she like had a whole thing to say about that because she felt like she was being replaced, right? So there, it's like it's not easy to be a mother or to be a parent in general in this culture. This is something we talked about a lot with Differ Lib too. It was like capitalism is not communal, first of all, but it's also not very friendly to women and to mothers and to anybody who mothers other people, right? It's just not a very nurturing society, period. Going back to Mars and Cancer, this is probably all related, right? Like, it's very hostile to mother somebody in this culture. So yeah, all of our moms to some extent kind of had to at some point be like, listen, kid, I'm gonna need you to just figure it out because I can't take care of you and deal with your feelings and come home from my 8-hour workday and cook dinner for you and for my lazy ass husband and clean the house and do this and all the domestic labor that's imposed onto women, like, or that's imposed onto mothers and people who mother. Like, I get her real bad. Okay. I get her real bad. I get them real bad. Like, it's 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 not easy. So yeah, a lot of that does land on us as children because now we're out here with all of this neglect and emotional what's it called? Emotional immaturity and emotional abandonment that we just kind of repeat the cycles, throughout generations. So yeah, we all had the same mom because culturally the context is that yeah, the society is not friendly to mothers. It's not accommodating to mothers and motherhood, right? To child rearing in general. So kids just end up suffering. And now we're all out here having to have conversations about this, about how to communicate your feelings to somebody else in a way that will actually be received by other people. Now, the other thing on the same topic, because Krista mentioned not feeling as emotionally mature as she thought. That was another thing that he talked about in this podcast, was that like he was talking about emotional intelligence, not necessarily maturity, but emotional intelligence is not um I don't remember what he said it isn't, but emotional intelligence sometimes is just like being aware enough of your own emotions that you can kind of like speak to them, and not like in a bypassing way, but like, for example, if you are in conflict with somebody and you notice that your own like nervous system is all out of place and that you don't fully know how you feel, to be able to say, I can tell I'm not ready for this conversation right now because there's a lot going on for me internally and I don't even know what to say about it. Like, he was saying that's more of emotional intelligence and emotional maturity than needing to immediately have an answer for how you feel and what you think. Like, sometimes it's not about, if we're talking about, let's say, Mercury and Cancer, maybe there's a pressure for Mercury and Cancer. Tell me if this is true if you have Mercury and Cancer in your chart. Maybe there's a pressure to feel like you have to know exactly how to speak to your emotions in a moment. And I think that also kind of falls more in the emotional perfectionism realm versus just knowing, like, yeah, I kind of don't feel like I'm ready for this conversation right now. You know, like, there's a lot of, because it goes back to discernment. Maybe this is related to Mercury and Pisces too. I don't know. This All of these things are related. I guess it's Mercury in general. So even the emotional intelligence of like knowing yourself. I guess it's some self-awareness too, of just knowing yourself to say like, I know if we continue this conversation right now, I'm going to lose my shit. And I don't want to lose my shit. Like, I don't necessarily need to repress all of my feelings, but I also don't want to fully crash out because that's just not productive. It's not going to get us where we need to go. So instead of crashing out, I'm going to propose that we revisit this conversation in like 20 minutes after I go have a little walk, after I go have something to eat, make sure I'm not hungry, have a little drink, something so that I can come back and actually be in the part of my brain that can really have this conversation and not just speak for myself, but to also hold what you're going to say back to me. Because it can't just be about me and how I feel and what I think. And this is another thing they were talking about in that conversation, that this comes up in relationship work all the time, is that there's the person who wants immediate results from the conversation, from the conflict, to be relieved of the conflict. And then there's also the person who comes back and says like, I'm going to need a minute, and then the person who wants to resolve now gets perceived as as anxious, and then the person who needs a minute, needs to take a beat, gets perceived as avoidant. When in reality, like, yes, you can take those two extremes in both ends, but there's a sweet space between the middle where both people can get what they want, but that's the thing that you have to be able to negotiate with the other person. This is something I was terrible at in relationships before relationship school, because I needed it solved now. We need to talk about it now, knowing good and damn well I'm still in my 3 to 5 day processing window, and I just got to the point of my processing where I actually feel my feelings. So I'm another good 2 to 3 days away from actually being able to process why I was feeling that way, But then here I am wanting to hurry up and resolve the conflict. Like, what do I look like? So shout out to Emilia for all of their patience with me, because they would be like, listen, bitch, I need a minute to process. It took us a long time to get to a point where we were like, okay, we can talk about this, but not right now. When can we reconvene? Still working on it, but such is life. My mother and I have to work on this a lot as well, because she's the one who wants to resolve it now. And I'm like, hold on, girl. Let's revisit in a minute. And he made a really good point in the podcast to say that, like, something kind of going back to the whole, like, I'm fine thing. When someone asks how you're doing, it's like when someone says, hey, do you have a minute? Can we talk? Or like, even if it's just like at work or whatever it is, if you immediately are just like, sure, what's up? And you're not actually in a place to talk, you're already setting yourself up to not fully be present or fully engaged in the conversation, because you just lied. Why did you just lie? You just lied to yourself. You just lied to them. Yeah, I'm in the space to talk, go for it. When really you're in the middle of writing an email, or really you're in deep thought or contemplation about something else. Like, give yourself a chance. Say, hey, I'm going to come to you. Give me about 5 minutes to finish this up, and then I'll be over there. Now, I can already hear it. What you don't need to do, going back to cardinal signs, is take that strategy of giving yourself a minute, an honest minute to like collect yourself or whatever it is, and weaponize that against the other person as a way to like control the conversation, right? Or to like control the pace of the conversation or whatever's going on. The minute you start using it for like way too much control of the other person versus just like exercising your own emotional autonomy and boundaries, now you're running into some issues. Don't do that. You ain't got to do all that. I always say, at least when it comes to like intimate conversations, you're allowed to say with the other person, if you actually trust them, because trust is a big part of this, right? That like, I'm not fully formed or processed in how I feel about this, and I need to talk through some of it with you. So, I apologize in advance if I say something the wrong way, but I might say something the wrong way. But we got to start somewhere, and maybe you don't even say all that, but like, even just that would help, because it sets context for the conversation. Remember, coming back to Jupiter, it's like one of the things they told us for coaching was to set the coaching container in the beginning. And like, one of the things we do a lot is interrupt. And so they would say, if you set set context for the conversation and say like, hey, I'm a new coach, and one of the things that I'm like practicing doing so that I can stay on topic with the conversation is to interrupt and ask questions as I need to. So I'm just letting you know I'm not trying to be rude or cut you off, but I might interrupt you. And then the other person, when you interrupt them, will know, oh, okay, like there's a reason for this. They're not just like disrespecting me and talking over me, right? So like sometimes you just this is communication. It's less about like sometimes it's less about the actual words you say and more about, are you creating a container for that language to exist? For that language to exist with the meaning and intention that you're trying to give to it. Right? There's a big there like you could it helps. So I think this is something relevant to the times. I feel like I'm on topic, but I'm also just kind of like running away with a lot of different thoughts because it's all relevant, right? Did I address everything I was gonna say? K2 and Virgo drilled into my head that I'm not a robot. Exactly. So what you're saying is my Virgo rising is to blame for this. And I genuinely don't think it's one placement. I think it's really it's Earth, right? Like it's Earth, and it makes sense that it's Earth because Earth and water and the way that they relate to each other. Like it's very literal for me. If you think about the Grand Canyon as Earth and water, the Grand Canyon used to just be at one point in time probably just like flat, and then years of water and also wind erosion carved into carved into the canyons and formed the land the way that it looks now. Like that's Earth and water. It's the ways that Earth is changed by water, and water changes Earth. Wait, yeah, the ways that Earth is changed by water, and that water is also changed by Earth. You know, like sometimes it's going to take years and years and years and years and years for water to erode a rock, but the path that water takes to like carve out its path also changes depending on the obstacles that are in its way. Going a little too far with the metaphor, but the point is if the whole point of earth signs is to conform to your environment, then like, yeah, Earth is not leading with this idea that say fire signs kind of know that they can change shit quickly. You know, you light something on fire, that bitch is gonna burn down unless something comes to stop it. Water. So fire is used to like changing things, and this is probably relevant for Aries transits coming up. But for water, I mean for Earth is like, I'm gonna have to conform to the situation, to the other people, to the surroundings. Like I'm not going to be the agent of change here. So yeah, if the whole thing is that, you know, you are wanting to impose change in a situation when dealing with other people, that isn't like imposing your will on them, kind of got to use your feelings, not be emotionally manipulative, you know, while Venus is still in Pisces, but to be able to speak to your feelings goes a long way. As an Aquarius/Leo rising, I'm annoyed by not being able to just think through it and moved on. Me too. Me too. And then we saw this. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Me, a perfect example. This is the praise I need. Yes. From masking for so long and taking on the servant role. Yeah. That's the other thing, earth signs. We also tend to have more capacity to hold other people's feelings than even our own feelings. What's that about? What's that about? You can so full of everybody else's feelings that there's no room for your own, child. Who asked you to hold all that? Oh God, that was another thing that he said in this podcast that I had to make sure I told y'all was like going back to the whole like, well, I just feel like you, blah blah blah, that you think or that you feel, or I just feel like you, blah blah blah, whatever projection it is. He framed it as like, this is you taking on something that nobody asked you to take on. Nobody asked you to take on the labor of assuming how this other person feels or imposing all of this meaning onto how you think this other person feels when they haven't explicitly communicated that to you. Or like taking on this responsibility of not wanting the other person to react in a certain way to how you feel. Like, sometimes they're going to feel how they feel about how you feel at first. And then, maybe they come around, maybe they don't, but yeah, you're like assuming a lot of responsibility for the other person's emotions as well, in a way that's like beyond just being considerate. It's like you have made yourself the cause of their emotional state when really their emotional state is theirs too. Now, I do think I'm choosing my words carefully here because I do think people take this too far to make it seem like we don't have any impact on each other. We absolutely do have emotional impact on each other. We do trigger each other. We do sometimes make each other feel a certain way. However, and um it's more accurate, it's more impactful to just name how you feel and to own that for yourself and then state the experience that brought up those feelings for you so as to not project blame onto the other person. That's more so the other person, I think. It's more so that the other person can hear what you're saying versus feeling blamed or attacked. Because at the end of the day, like, they are triggering an emotion in you with their actions, but the feeling is yours. Like, and what I mean by that is the same thing can happen to two different people and they'll respond to it differently. Like, I'm the type of person who likes to be kind of cheeky and like roast people, or like poke fun with people in real life. And some people don't like that shit. Some people don't like to play like that. Some people do. Some people don't mind it, and some people don't like it. So in the way of like making someone feel that way, it's like, yes, you are doing an action that's eliciting a feeling in someone else, but the way that they feel about it, like if one person takes it as a joke and the other person is hurt by it, that's theirs to own. And then you acknowledge the role that you played and maybe either not knowing that they felt that way or conversely knowing that they would probably react that way and doing it anyway, which a lot of people do. So sometimes it's an accident. Sometimes you did know better and you shouldn't have did that shit and you did it anyway. But more nuances, right? Of people coming from different contexts and interpreting things in different ways. Being plagued with the feeling of brokenness will do it. Huh, this is resonating in a hot, itchy way. I'm so sorry. This is hitting close to home, y'all in my house. Eek. To this day, my mom will say, I wish I could be as selfish as you, as I've started to say, I wish that for you too. Wow. That's wild. I wish I could be as selfish as you. Well, maybe you should. Try it. I've low-key said that to my mom before about boundaries where she like gets mad at me because I do a thing that she feels like she can't do. And I'm like, well, maybe you should try it. Don't resent me for doing this thing that I feel like I'm in my power to do as far as like having boundaries. And then you are mad at me for having boundaries because you don't have boundaries. Like, then have boundaries and let me be mad. I don't know. When your mom treats your needs like a burden, I think that does it. Exactly. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and my brother has ADHD, and I was like, I need to be the perfect child because my mom is already going through a lot. Exactly. That's the other piece of it too. Like, if you're an overly empathetic child as well, you will abandon your own needs and your own emotional reality for somebody else's because it's like you're a kid and you don't know any better. The way that something really important for all of us to learn, I think, is that when talking about this Jupiter stuff and like meaning making, when you're a child and you like are trying to make sense of the world around you, like kids will make all kinds of meaning out of their experiences, usually blaming themselves because as children you tend to be more egocentric just by nature of being a child. You will internalize a lot of things and then create whole frameworks around those beliefs and ideas that you have about what something means and then carry that with you your whole life and not even realize it. So that's what's so good about like things like inner child work and shadow work and therapy in general and like just talking to somebody about stuff you went through as a kid because a lot of times you just didn't have context for what was going on and what was happening in the world and what your parents were going through. And so we make things mean things that maybe is not the full picture. It's not to say that the meaning that you gave to it is like totally wrong and invalid because that's your perspective and experience. Just again noting that like I had this experience, but my parents were also having this experience. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to go out of your way and forgive them depending on what the situation is, or anything like that. But it just when it comes to like reframing things sometimes, or at least like, I don't know, at least just dealing with shit from the past that was out of your control. It can just be really helpful to say, my parents are probably going through things that I couldn't even understand. And that's their business. I don't need to take that on. But for me, like, I wish I would have had more support with this particular thing. And I didn't get it, and that sucks. And then go from there. Um, but sometimes I find that can help a little bit with like the bitterness and the resentment as well. Cause yeah, like again, parenting, mothering, fathering in this economy, in this society, terrible. And also you were a child who genuinely needed more than what you got probably. Ba-ba-ba. Resentment through the roof and making it everyone else's problem. Me real bad because the mood meter goes straight to bad when I'm hungry. Yes, yes, yes. A necessary discourse, I fear, at my first house Cancer Venus. Internal family systems with my therapist has been life-changing. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, internal family systems, so good. So good. Um, I loved internal family systems. I did that with a somatic therapist for a few months, a year and a half ago or so. And it is amazing how many voices, how many different people's voices you have in your head about who you are and who you should be and how you should be behaving. It's like, whoa. Um, yeah, very helpful. Very helpful. Something else I was going to say. I lost it. Did I talk about everything? Do y'all have any questions? Um yeah, so I guess the gist of all of this with the whole like Mars and Cancer thing in the last part of this retrograde transit post shadow period for Mars and Cancer while stuff is in Pisces now. Oh, that was the other thing. Oh, don't lose it though. I almost lost it again. Damn. Oh, I lost it again. The other part of it being like, yeah, like it's not about like regulation in the context of Cancer placements for me is not about being cool, calm, and collected. It's about being responsive versus reactive. And responsive just means that you notice that there's something going on and you respond to it versus letting yourself be totally led by your impulses. And it's also acknowledging that sometimes you're not going to be in control of your impulses, and that's okay too. Like, you're a person. But if you're a person who is trying to, again, like, get certain meanings across, or like when you're trying to have a productive conversation, since we are talking about Mercury really and the full moon stuff. If you're a person trying to have a productive conversation, then it is worth it to, again, be responsive to your emotional state at any given moment, because that's what the moon is all about. That's what Cancer is all about. It's a feeling exists and there's a response that needs to happen. And sometimes the response, like we said, is um, I'm having a lot of big feelings and I need to take a second so that I can understand them. Even if you say it in tears, right? Or sometimes the response is, I need to get this out right now because it feels urgent to me. And if we need to talk about it later, we can, you know? Um, and sometimes, friends, sometimes it just looks like crying with no words. Sometimes it just looks like giving somebody a hug. Sometimes it looks like telling somebody, no. Sometimes it's a handshake, a head nod. Sometimes there are no words and just feelings. And that's okay too. But yeah, context matters in terms of, like, obviously coming back to discernment, really being the mutable of it all, is like, yeah, sometimes that shit's not received as well by certain parties. And it's good to notice, because sometimes you don't know till you try. It's good to notice who can handle what and who can't. And depending on the situation, maybe you communicate that you're looking for a different response than what you got, or, that you needed something other than what you received, or whatever it is. Sometimes there's additional communications that need to happen as a result. And then sometimes it's also, like I said, the aftercare of it all, or the, what's it called? The repair of it all, of just being like, this is something I've at least gotten better at. Like, if you're not the best at, like, kind of modulating these things in the moment, you can get really good at repair, and it goes a long way. And for me, I've noticed that if I'm like being short with somebody in a moment because the part of me that's so repressed is like feeling angsty about something and wants to say it but doesn't know how to say it, um and is doing something else and being short and shutting down, then I'll like, I'll have my moment. I'll give myself a moment when I get out of the situation, and then I'll come back around and I'll say, you know what? I didn't know what to say earlier. I was feeling XYZ things and I shut down. So I apologize for that. But I would like to talk about this at a later time if we can, or, whatever. Like, there's always another solution besides being passive aggressive or besides being, volatile and defensive. But there's nothing wrong with your feelings leading the conversation sometimes and like taking up space in the room. In fact, it's really important that you do that, because sometimes that bitch don't hear you till you raise your voice. Bitch being gender neutral, by the way. But sometimes they don't hear you until you get loud. Sometimes they don't hear you and they don't really get it until you snap. But those, I mean, I think personally, my bias is that those should be like last results. Like, you really are fed up at this point. You're fed up, they're not getting it. You've had this conversation a million times, they're being willfully ignorant, whatever it is. Then, like, yeah, sometimes you gotta crash out a little bit. But like, don't make that the main way that you relate to people, because people just aren't gonna like one. This is actually very important. um while we hold space for our own humanity and emotional imperfections, and we're not trying to be emotionally perfectionist, um also be aware that your actions have consequences. And so, yeah, sometimes if you carry yourself a certain way all the time, people are not going to fucking like you. They don't have to accept that. They don't have to put up with that. They don't. Maybe you need to find friends or relationships with people who can handle that, right? Some people just can't fucking handle that. I don't know. It doesn't have to be a statement about you. One thing my therapist said to me today is like, sometimes people do things. Sometimes people do things. You don't always have to like it. They don't always have to like you. Some people have a little bit more tolerance and capacity for certain things than others. That's fine. Everybody acknowledge your limitations, okay, and move accordingly. So don't try to make people who are not hardcore and thick skinned be hardcore and thick skinned. They're just not going to be. And you're going to keep getting frustrated that you can't just say what you want to say, how you want to say it in any given moment without having to consider how they might respond to you. Part of being in a relationship is being inconvenienced by the other person's feelings. But if it's too much for you, not that the other person is too much, but if the behavior is too much for you and your nervous system, it's okay to admit that and to say, maybe we just don't need to be that close because I can't do this. I can't do this all the time, girl. I'm tired. Like, I know you got energy for the smoke all the time. I just don't. Okay. My nervous system is very sensitive. I'm sensitive. Like, and I don't want to be in beef constantly. So maybe this just don't work, right? There's also that felt like a very important caveat to add in, because the other thing I really hate is when people are like, well, that's just how I am, and so you just have to deal with it. Like, actually, I really don't. If this is just how you are, cool, I accept that this is how you are, and through acceptance I'm going to leave because my boundary is that I don't want to do all that. So I don't want to deal with all that. It's not for me. So I'm gonna move around. But thanks. God, we could sort this out. And I've ended a friendship like that where I was like, you know what? This just is not my speed. I used to be the way that you're behaving as well, and I've decided that that takes a lot of energy for me that I could be using for other things. So I'm gonna move on. But best of luck to you. Genuinely appreciate the therapy lessons we get on here. I don't have a background in this field, so I appreciate the info given to help me understand myself and others. Yay! I appreciate that because I love therapy. Or well, I love psychology and psychotherapy. So that's what I like to use astrology for. That's what I went to school for, got my little degree in. That's what I've gotten certifications for. That's the podcasts and informations that I consume. So that's my jam. And that's what I like to do with it. And I'm glad that it resonates with y'all, because I feel like there's nothing better than knowing the timing that certain things come up and then having astrotherapy to be like, hey, this is maybe something you want to talk to a trusted professional about. If my books aren't open, you could also talk to me about it too. But, um, you know. I have become someone who cries at the drop of a hat. Thank you, years of therapy. Learning to apologize is so helpful. Very, 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 very important. Very important skill. I don't cry at the drop of a hat thanks to therapy. Exactly. See, different things for different people. Love that. It's been hard to know how to repair regarding masking and COVID. Me too. And when I figure it out, I will let you know. I've had enough tough love and smoke for a lifetime. Exactly. Okay, question. What kind of tools exist to help folks with chronic emotional repression? Um, so I am somebody who is very emotionally repressed, and something that helped me a lot was somatic therapy. I don't know if it'll work for everybody, but somatic therapy did help me a lot. Um, because it's not just the practice of like how to get in touch with your emotions, it's also the practice of getting in touch with your emotions in front of somebody else that really is the issue, right? And so learning that safety with a therapist, and then learning tools with that therapist of like how to navigate situations with people you may not be as comfortable being emotionally vulnerable around, can be super duper helpful. If anybody in the chat also has other suggestions, I'm open to some of those too. Something else, I think journaling, my therapist told me, journaling is also very helpful, especially for air sign people, because we can be very quick processors, like mentally and cognitively, but not necessarily like emotionally. And so when you have to actually sit and handwrite, your feelings, there's like some alchemy that happens with the whole like your mind to hand connection and having to slowly write out how you feel and like really observe your feelings on paper and all that kind of stuff. So that's another process that I think is really helpful. I also think allegedly, and I'm not endorsing this in places where it's not legal, but there are certain plant materials that I think have really helped me with emotional repression. One of them um, is a little type of fungi, so that could be another thing um, that helps you. But yeah, I think those are some tools that might be useful. I think just like in general, slowing down and being with yourself can be really helpful too. Just take your time. Again, it's kind of that exposure therapy again of like slowly over time allow a little bit more feelings to come out in different situations and then see how you feel more than how the other person feels. Like sitting with yourself while you're having big feelings in front of somebody else in whatever increments feel comfortable to you slowly over time to build that trust can be really helpful as well. As a reformed crash out and emotional mess, taking time to process and actually think through what I'm feeling is amazing. Still rushing for resolution, but not in a let's just fight kind of way. Same. Yeah. Yeah. Working on me. No emotional perfectionism. Yeah, that was really the word for today. When I saw that post this morning, I was like, oh, that's the one. We need to talk about this. I refer a lot of people for somatic therapy. Sometimes words are just hard. Yeah. Picking up what you're putting down. Cool. Plant medicines did me a world of good for real. Yeah. Sometimes they did a lot for me. The first time that I did them, a lot came up that I was like, wow. And then it kind of stayed that way. One more thing I'll add and then I'll close is that there's also something about like depending on what type of emotionally repressed person you are, like for me, there's a lot of shame around emotional expression and a lot of cringe around emotional expression of any kind. Like it doesn't even just have to be bad, just like any kind. Allowing myself to enjoy things that younger me would have loved. Um, like ironically, for emotional repression, like it's not just bad feelings, it's good feelings too. So like Wicked is a great example for me. Y'all know I'm obsessed. Newly obsessed Wicked fan because of Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo specifically. But I had so much cringe around the fact that I loved that movie so much because I don't know, I have a perception that musicals are corny, even though I loved High School Musical and I loved Cheetah Girls and I loved like all that shit when I was growing up. But it feels like such like a juvenile part of me. That part of me as an adult is like, oh, so cringe and like childish, whatever. I don't know why I feel that way. But my therapist was like, yeah, well, so like if you find yourself um if you love, defying gravity and it brings you to tears each time, then let yourself cry whenever you hear it. Like don't hold back the tears, just let yourself cry and tell yourself that it's okay, you know? And so what I've started doing as my own therapy is letting myself listen to the Wicked soundtrack in the car and embrace the cringe around it and like really embracing the part of me that is really like dramatic and theatrical and just like fun and funny. And like the more that I can allow space for those feelings and allow space for the joy and the pleasure. Oh my God, the pleasure. The pleasure. That creates a lot of space for the expression of the other things as well because they're the same. The good feelings and the quote good feelings and the quote bad feelings, they're the same. They're not the same, but they're the same. You know what I mean? Like they are all we talk about like emotional capacity stuff, which I think we've talked about before with cancer placements. Um you in the same way that like what am I trying to say? It's all the same. Like the more capacity you have for good feelings, the more capacity you have for bad feelings, if we're going to use a binary. The more capacity you have for comfortable feelings, the more capacity you have for uncomfortable feelings. So if it takes 5 times as many pleasurable experiences to overcome an averse one, then look, you get to indulge in 5 pleasurable experiences. Wow, amazing, incredible. I think that's something with like relationship work that's so important, is that it's not just about like the thing after repair is creating more positive associations, right? So like you can use it as an excuse, like, wow, we really like overcame this obstacle together, makeup sex. For the rest of the week, makeup sex, like, whatever feels good to you. We really overcame this obstacle together. Let's go out for ice cream. Let's celebrate. Oh my God. If we're talking about Cancer and Taurus, while we still have Jupiter and Taurus a little bit longer, pleasure and celebration and feeling good and comfort. Like add more of that in. And the more when you're having those experiences that you let yourself just be consumed by that feeling. Now, some of you not too far. Some of you not too far. If you're on, this is for repressed people, okay? For the repressed girlies only. For the repressed girlies and for the people who tend to numb out on things that are maybe not that great for you. Really let yourself feel the fullness of just genuinely nice moments. The sun on your skin when it's been cloudy for 4 days. Like, oh, this is where that gratitude practice comes in. Like, oh my God, the sun is out. Or if you've been in a drought, like we have been in Texas, and all of a sudden it's raining. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that it's raining. Oh, and let yourself just feel it, listen, listening and reforming Catholic. Exactly. Because we're talking about the body. We're talking about Cancer. Like, that first sip of cold water when it's been 1,000,000 degrees outside, and just the relief, let it feel good. That's what I'm gonna say for all of my emotionally repressed people, is let it feel good. And then once you let it feel good, how long can it feel good? How long can it feel good? That's another good thing to say when you're talking your partner through it, by the way, if you're wondering. In my 5th house, perfection and just letting myself experience fun without guilt is so hard, but I'm getting better at it. Yeah, totally. Especially when you got Capricorn in the 5th house. I get it. Me with Libra in the 5th house as well. My 5th house perfection ended with me transitioning, I think. Did it end with me? No, it began with me transitioning. Is that right? It is. Oh my God, I almost forgot. You guys, today is my maniversary. I was supposed to tell y'all this a long time ago and I forgot. Today is my T-boy birthday. I'm 2 years old. And I'm going to celebrate by going to the gym because I forgot that today was my T-boy birthday and I didn't plan anything else. But I'm going to go enjoy something because of it. So yeah. Yeah, it's my anniversary. Do something that I enjoy that feels nice. Thank you. Thank you. I almost forgot to tell you guys. Happy birthday. Thank you. Thank you. It's so cute. Yesterday, I was at my parents' house and we worked on a puzzle together, a 1,000-piece puzzle for like literally, I probably got there at like 10 a.m. And we spent, I think at least from noon at the latest, we might have started around 11:30 working on this puzzle. And I was there until 8 o'clock. We worked on it nonstop. But it's my dog's birthday, maybe, is what we say, because we don't know exactly when her birthday is, but it was last week. Sometime between the end of March and the beginning of April, we guess. Her gotcha day is in May. But every year during my dog's birthday, I would be like, "It's your birthday, maybe," for like the whole week and just get them all excited. And so I brought her presents yesterday. And like pets are another thing. If you have dogs that are like really excitable, getting them excited and just being excited with them and like hyping them up is another just wonderful, one of the wonderful joys of life. And so I got to do that with her yesterday, bring her toys, and she was so happy, chasing her around everywhere. Ah, anything that cracks your heart open is so good for emotional repression. But she loved it. Happy birthday, maybe. So yeah, happy birthday, maybe to her. And yeah, look, I've speculated that I'm neurodivergent in the ADHD direction. Um, Also have potentially had that also suspected by trained professionals, but not officially diagnosed or tested. And nothing confirmed that for me more than not just me sitting and doing that puzzle for hours yesterday, not eating, not taking a break, not doing anything other than that puzzle for several hours once we started it, but my parents also not eating, not drinking, not taking a break for hours. And we weren't even really talking about anything but the puzzle when we did talk. And a lot of times just sitting in silence, doing this puzzle and getting excited when somebody would find a piece that we've been looking for forever. Hello? Like, yeah, just I don't know. I'm so pleased. I would like to go over there and do it again, but I'm not going to because I need to do something else. But yeah, I was like, yep, the neurodivergence, it is. I already suspected for both of my parents in different ways, but now I'm like, okay, yeah, that kind of solidified it for me because there are other things that they do that I'm like, and I know it usually runs in the family anyway, so hello. Okay, it's been 2 hours. I need to stop yapping and I need to go work out. But this is great. I hope y'all enjoyed. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Please like the video if you haven't already and subscribe and turn your notifications on so you can join us every Sunday at noon whenever we do Transit Chat Live to talk about the transits of the week. Um Yeah, I'm working on a big Patreon post. And I did say I was potentially going to make my Patreon free, but then I realized that in order to keep my business, I still need some amount of money coming in. So I'm probably going to keep my Patreon, but actually like add to it more. And then if I don't, then I'll do something else. But big Saturn and Pisces post on the way. And what else? I'm also going to create a wait list for when I do reopen books because I've already had like 3 or 4 people ask me. So feel free to shoot me an email, mix.mercuryastro@gmail.com, or DM me or whatever if you want to be on the wait list for when I reopen, because I'm probably going to reopen with limited spots per month. So yeah, if you're interested in that, let me know. I don't know when I'll reopen my books. It's a surprise to us all, but we'll see. And yeah, because yeah, there are certain things that I still need. Yeah, don't use Apple to sign up for new Patreon members because Apple charges. If you use the Apple platform to join Patreon or to buy anything off of my Patreon shop, it will charge an extra fee. So don't do that. Do it from your desktop or from your laptop or whatever, from your browser instead of the app, the Patreon app, because they will charge you extra because they're greedy. Okay. That's all. I'll talk to you all very, very soon. I love you so much. Bye.